All right. Awesome. So we are recording this. Thank you everybody for coming and thank you online. So today we have Kyle, who's the data analyst at Schoodic Institute. Some people may not know the data that Schoodic has such a person, but Kyle's it. And so we'll be learning more about it, about at least one of the projects that Kyle's been working on. But just a little bit of background about Kyle, because Kyle actually has a background around here. Like local, so actually, where are you, where did you grow up?
I'm up in Ellsworth.
In Ellsworth, so Ellsworth, grew up in Ellsworth, was super into birding in high school and through high school, actually participated in a BioBlitz here in Acadia, in 2013 or 14. Then went on and got his bachelor's in wildlife ecology at the University of Maine. Did a bunch of birding jobs until he, in carpentry, multi-talented, and then landed this data analyst job at Schoodic Institute, where he's been working for the past a little bit more than 2 years there. And so today he's gonna be talking about a project that's been National Park Foundation funded, kind of synthesizing some of the citizen science data and communicating it through different things.
Thank you, Abe. Yeah, so thanks everybody for coming. I'm Kyle, as Dave said, data analyst with Schoodic Institute. And I think that the project that I'm going to talk about today is really focused on this method of early detection and monitoring, as well as the science communication aspect through the use of citizen science data and working with citizen scientists. And there you go. I want to start off by kind of tying this into forests, as Acadia is very heavily forested, right? In the Northeast, it's sort of generally known, you know, we have all these different aspects that are really causing rapid change to our forests, such as like climate change, human modified land use, overpopulated deer, and generation death, as we've talked about many times, I'm sure. And all of these are sort of kind of contributing to this rapid change in forests, as well as potentially forest losses, in addition. And specifically here in Acadia, right, we were sort of impacted by the recent arrival, somewhat recent now, of hemlock wood delgid. That's really seeming to start to spread. Jesse, we could talk more about that. And presumably impending arrival of emerald ash borer. We also had the big loss of red pine through red pine scale. And glossy buckthorn is a major problem, and it's a big focus on a lot of our restoration projects. That's right in Bass Harbor Ranch and Gray Meadow. So directing or detecting those sort of species and detecting maybe changes to those species ranges is really critical to implementing cost-effective management, as well as limiting the impact of those disturbances. And that's sort of what these projects I'm going to talk about today are focused on. There's also a lot of challenges to monitoring, right? Monitoring is one method that we use to try to help understand those different stressors that are impacting our forests and help determine what actions might need to be taken. But unfortunately, a lot of these forest disturbances probably are going undetected for too long to really be the most effective at, or be the most cost effective for management, as well as, well, I would say the current mode of monitoring protocols are also really labor and time intensive. It's often really difficult to have enough time and staff to cover a wide enough geographic area to really detect a lot of these smaller, maybe like forest pest species. And right now, a lot of our monitoring focuses on small plots, which have the same sort of issue of not maybe detecting as many species as quickly, and often require specialized skills that can also be expensive or difficult to find, and especially difficult to maintain season to season. So what we've kind of suggested is maybe citizen science could be a potential tool to help in some of these places that we're struggling. You know, I think that having a broader group of people out searching, could really obviously increase the likelihood of detecting some sort of species of interest. Hopefully noting the presence of like an invasive species or forest pests much sooner upon their arrival. And especially with eBird and Naturalist, there's a lot of benefits there too, because it's already a pretty extensive database that's sort of being, for the park's perspective, right, or management's perspective, sort of like passively gaining observations without having to put much out. So there's some benefits there. And so sort of an introduction to the project is, it is the National Park Foundation in part funded project, collaborative between NPS and SCUDIC. And there's sort of 3 projects that have come out of this, and some are still sort of in the works, some are active, but obviously always being updated or improved. And so those 3, in no particular order, other than the way that I want to talk about them today, go Science from the People, which is sort of a manuscript that summarizes the data sets of iNaturalist and eBird for both Acadia as well as Katahdin Woods and Waters National Monument. A manager's report that's specific to Acadia that some of you in this room get, that Vic and Abe and Jesse have been really helpful on creating, and the Welcome Center display in the SCUDIC Institute Welcome Center in Rockefeller Hall. That is sort of like a advanced board of observations that also acts as a science communication tool for people that are coming in to see what sort of observations are happening and see how citizen science is being used for actual science and management. So yeah, Science from the People, the first part. So these are some of the results from this summary analysis that I've done. And it's really interesting to compare these 2 parks because of their difference in history and sort of like the long existing history of Acadia. It's been around for many, many, many years compared to a much newer park like Katahdin Woods and Waters. And also the geographic location of these 2 parks is pretty interesting in comparison too. And I think it's impressive to see how many observations are still happening in Katahdin Woods and Waters relative to the span of time that Acadia has been around compared to Katahdin. And so Acadia has over 524,000 observations of individual species. So that's including every iNaturalist report of an individual species, as well as like each species on an eBird checklist. So it adds up pretty quickly. There's 4,700 iNaturalist users from Acadia National Park that have submitted observations here, as well as 6,600 eBird users. And we'll see this sort of trend happening a lot, where eBird maybe has a little bit more engagement and a little bit more effort that's occurring here. So a little bit more observations and a little bit more observers through eBird. Comparatively, Katahdin Woods and Waters has 14,500-ish observations by around 90 iNaturalist users and 210 eBird users. And I think that this is sort of just adding to the opportunities that these platforms present for monitoring species, just showing like the sheer number of observers that are active, as well as the number of species, the number of observations too. I like this one a lot, this slide, because it's really cool heat map of all the observations from each park. And you can see that on the left in Acadia, we have actually 96% coverage through these 2 databases. So at least one observation has been submitted in almost every area of Acadia National Park. You can see that there is a lot in that lower range, but there's also quite a bit of grid cells that are higher. And these are 0.5 kilometer square grid cells too. So the hotspots, obviously, Great Meadow, where there's a lot of bio-blitzes that SCUDIC has been running in partnership with Wild Acadia and the park. We see another hotspot at SCUDIC Point, where our campus is. Also along sort of the seawall to Ship Harbor area and Sand Beach to Otter Point too. And those are probably more of like the heavily visited areas, right? So that might be more representative of, I mean, they all are, but those specific areas where there's less input, I think, from scientists and more input from just the general public. Comparatively to Katahdin Woods and Waters, it's bigger, right, overall in terms of area, and it's still really interesting to spread. I think that there's a lot less accessibility to a lot of the areas, and yet we're still seeing a pretty awesome spread throughout the park, which is cool. That's 29% of the park has, 29% of the grid cells in the park are, have at least one observation, and it looks like the sort of hotspots there are right around the Sandbank Stream Campground and Lynx Pond area. And the other cool part of these projects is the taxonomic coverage. Oh my, I gave away the answer. I was gonna ask you what the most observed species for birds were, but yeah, like on the left we have eBird specific observations, or number of species, sorry, and then on the right is natural species. So eBird is cool. You can see for Acadia, which is the top gray line, solid gray line, it increases pretty rapidly throughout the 70s, which is all backlogged because eBird didn't exist then, right? This is just people going back and entering their species and maybe reports that they've written down in notebooks and things. And it's really intriguing to see how that increases until, you know, around 1990 when it starts to plateau, but then revamps, I think, in the more recent years as eBird becomes more popular and people maybe, and as we know, you know, birding has become more and more popular as well. And I think that just the increased number of people out is also adding to detecting more new species to the park.
So are some of those, are those like newest species, just like the, I don't know, what do you call it?
Vagrants.
It's just, yeah, vagrant, that just kind of end up here by
It
accident?
is, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's a lot of, yeah, just species that probably shouldn't be here, don't breed here, just were, you know, brought over somehow through storms or whatever it may be, yeah. And then we're just detecting them because there's more people out and about. I think that it's a really common thing throughout, right, like, it was probably happening this whole time, but seems like vagrants are more common now, I think largely because it's just such an increase in time spent looking for them. So for Katahdin Woods and Waters too, you know, we're not leveling out yet, 159 bird species, and still looks like it's on a pretty strong increasing trend, and that's pretty cool and impressive too, because it doesn't have any ocean. Which really adds a ton of species, which is why Acadia is so high. So it's really great to see the number of species still detected there for birds. And herring gull is the most abundant or most commonly reported, I should say, species for eBird. Probably also the most abundant in this area. And this is for Acadia I'm speaking to now, and then followed by American crow and then black-capped chickadee. For Katahdin Woods and Waters, the number one most common bird was white-throated sparrow, which makes sense. Followed by blue jay and then black-capped chickadee again. So black-capped chickadee is holding third row across the board. For a naturalist, you know, both parks are seeing, I mean, basically exponential growth in number of new species, right? So I think that there's a lot to do there. There's a lot of more species to be able to be found. And yeah, almost 2,000 species in total for Acadia National Park is pretty impressive. So some examples of those, the most reported one for Acadia is this three-toothed cinquefoil, and black crowberry is next. And both of those are species that are in some of our projects, some of the parks projects. And I think that that's where the boost for the species is coming from, sort of our refugia project, looking at these two species in and out of model refugia across Acadia National Park and surrounding areas, as well as some of like Chris and Nick's work with specifically with three-toothed cinquefoil. And I think that those projects have sort of helped lifted this. And then Canadian bunchberry, interesting when you start. For Katahdin Woods and Waters, the number one is red maple, followed by moose and black bear, which is kind of cool.
Red moose and black
Moose
bear.
and black bear. Yeah. So this table is for iNaturalist observations only, and looking at sort of the percentage of high quality research grade, as they call them, observations from these data sets. We have, for Acadia, you know, it was 67% of the animalia observations are research grade, which is great to see. And then interestingly for cottonwoods and water, the number one is the plantae kingdom with 74%. And I think that the important takeaway, which isn't really shown here, but 68% of the cottonwoods and waters data set is this high quality data. So it's either research grade naturalist observations or complete eBird checklists, which can be used for more rigorous scientific studies, such as like population modeling and things like that. Whereas there's also what they call incidental checklists in eBird, which is just you don't capture any effort, and that's what you need to do, is do like occupancy analyses and things like that.
There's a bacteria observation. How do you take a picture of? Is that through a microscope?
Salt marsh.
What?
You can photograph bacteria in salt marshes. Or sulfur reducing or in water, right? Aquatic.
I guess you could submit microscopic, you can
Yeah.
actually submit photos through but yeah, anyhow, that's weird. And then somebody could two people positively ID'd it separately.
Yeah.
The picture,
Yeah,
that's cool.
which is intriguing. Yeah, and viruses too is one in the cottonwoods and waters.
Somebody took a picture of a
Oh,
virus,
virus.
it was claimed it was a virus.
Something got over there.
Because I wonder if it's like a pathogen.
Yeah.
You know, bee sting disease or something like that.
Oh, sure. So the symptoms,
I don't know, that's where my
Could be.
head went, but I'm very biased in where
yeah,
I these things.
no, that's cool though, okay, that's interesting.
And then, so 68%, right, for cottonwoods and waters, high quality data. And despite the far higher number of observations in Acadia, which can make it really difficult to keep up with sort of like that research grade observations when you're faced with a whatever larger number of observations, still maintaining 66% of the total data set as high quality research grade or complete checklists, which is awesome. So all of that is sort of to say and try to convince you all that there is great value in these and that there's a lot of data that we can be doing something with. And that's where the second part kind of comes in, which is the manager's report. And as I said, working with Vic and Abe and Jesse, we've been able to institute this. It's currently running, and I think it's an ever adaptable product that we can always sort of work to improve. And I think that there's a lot of great opportunity with it. And so we can use the iNaturalist and eBird data without any sort of extra effort from management staff to sort of get extra observational data of species of interest through those two citizen science platforms, iNaturalist and eBird, right? Of course, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't be improved if we did put in effort to sort of like target species and things like that, but without having to, at least we can still improve our current monitoring. So the first step here was working with the managers here at Acadia to compile a list of species of interest. So right now that list sits at around 180 species. We keep updating it, it keeps changing. But those include invasive species like bossy buckthorn, they include forest pest species like hemlock delgid, and they also include rare native species like red pine that are maybe of conservation concern. They also include threatened and endangered species that are relative to the area that are either on federal or state lists. So, and a really cool fact is that the citizen science database, as I'm referring to it, which is the iNaturalist and eBird combined, has detected 65% of the species that are on that list within Acadia National Park, which is a good chunk. And not all of those species are actually found in the park, right? Some of them are concerned to be found in the park soon or might eventually be found.
Are locations buzzed for like a ginseng was found, which you're never gonna find in here, but like, how is that handled in my naturalist,
Yeah, that is one issue there. It is hidden. I think the coordinates are generally obscured to some extent. I think.
I don't think ginseng is that.
If it's endangered,
Uh-huh.
right, so if it's like federally listed, I think, it automatically screens it, like.
Okay.
And you can, whenever you're adding, you can adjust the visibility, so.
Okay,
So you can do that individually, but if it's, I don't know where the cutoff is, but certain designated species are automatically
okay,
hidden.
Yeah, endangered species are, but I think you, as a researcher, you can ask for the unfuzz data.
Yeah.
okay,
And this is a point of debate, kind of ongoing debate within the community as to what's the value of making the location information more open, which will help occupancy modeling versus giving the locations away. The danger is, harvesting of things like ginseng. So,
Yeah, and these are not open, these don't have those species in them, so that would also potentially limit some of those, like I'm saying, 65%. Some of them could have been excluded from that data set, so it could be higher. And same with eBird, certain species like owl, a lot of owls, northern hawk owl or great gray owl, which aren't, I don't think a species of, I don't know if you want those on the list or not, big, but
They should not.
So like those won't come through either, they'll be obscured and you have to ask special permission for those. And so, yeah, I'd have to go through another step to get those data.
eBird also has another level of, the reporting tends to be obscured because they tend to be like transects, so if somebody hikes 5 miles, but you only get a single location for all of the records.
Right.
So there tends to be a bit of geographic slop there,
Definitely, yeah.
just in that is.
Yeah, and then if you think about the heat map that I was showing, that's one reason that I think you're getting extra, like, well, although Great Meadow is a hotspot, I think that it also is being boosted further because of there's one hotspot, right, for basically Great Meadow, for eBird, and all those checklists got put there. So it's sort of like compiling a lot into one geographic point, which probably cover multiple of those half-kilometer grid cells. So there is that sort of geographic sloppiness, which is perfect way to put it. So quickly with the manager's report, there's a lot of R and sort of like development stuff that happens behind the scenes. It's a lot of, coding through R to build functions that pull data from those two data sets. I still use R to then convert that into an HTML document, and then with GitHub, which is just like a version software sort of development interface, you can then convert that HTML into an actual web page that you can host for free and update automatically. So I wrote the code to do it, and it just runs. So I don't, it happens every Monday for those of you to get the manager report email. You'll see that happening every Monday. I'm not doing that. It's running it all in the background, right? And then it just sends out the email and you can then view the web page. So it's hands off in a lot of ways. You just have to go in when you want to make changes or if you want to add a new functionality, things like that. So that's why this is really great too. Once it's done, it's somewhat done. And this is what it actually looks like when you view it, for those of you who haven't seen it. This is just an example from 1 week back in November. It's always 7 days of data. And it kind of has a few different pieces. The first part being an interactive map of the observations. In this case, you can see there was only maybe 6 records for this time period of species that are on that list. And these are the areas where it was, some down at Scudic Point, some somewhere nearish Great Meadow, south of Harvard, and then one over on what island is that? Down south of Castine, not sure. So then there's the 4 sort of main categories, and that's the pest and invasive species category, which is all of those ones that fall into the species or into this category. Then we have the threatened and endangered species, which in this case, I think they're all state threatened. Oh, there's one state endangered peregrine falcon, which is fairly commonly reported in the park, which is really great. rare native species showing up here, as well as new species to the park, which is, I compiled not only sort of the list of existing known species to the park, but then I also tried to like double check those by using iNaturalist eBird records, iDigBio and scan digitization records, sort of like as many databases as I could pull from that have geographic links to Acadia, and compile a big species list. And I don't think we've seen a single species that has been reported that has not been on that list yet. So we're waiting for a new park species one day.
Was
Yeah.
it the balsam woolly adulted a new species?
It was, but it wasn't, how'd that work? I think when I made this, it was just, oh. Yeah, okay, so what also happens is, it's a good point. And one thing that I think that there's some, it's like the fine details is, since it's summarizing 7 days, sometimes misses things that were backlogged. I'm trying to figure out the like workaround for that. Yeah. So then this is the email part that I was kind of talking about. So this is how we try to deliver it to the managers' inboxes. Just sort of again through R and through GitHub. So it's programmatically sent. I don't touch it. And then those people that are on the email list get this report, which then brings you to that page that I just showed, and you can sort of explore the locations for these different watch list species. And that's. Yeah. Any questions on that? I'll keep moving.
Cool stuff. Yeah,
And yeah, the third part is the Welcome Center display. And so this is again 7 days of data. And this one updates instead of once a week. This one's sort of running at a daily schedule. So it's always the previous 7 days whenever you're viewing it. And right now it's only hosted in the actual physical Welcome Center, but we do want to work to get it online as well for improved access. And the goal here really is to communicate to visitors a few different things. One of those being recent observations from the park that acts sort of like when you go to a wildlife refuge or whatever, there's sometimes like a whiteboard where people write down fun things they've seen. Part of it's that, which is just sort of cool and exciting to see. But then also we want to inspire people to start using iNaturalist and eBird, which then add to those sort of managers report data sets and just sort of also engage more people in science. And then the third part is to show and communicate back to people that are maybe already using it, using those platforms, how citizen science data can be used for science and management. So briefly, sort of like an intro page, people can read up on this project and get to familiarize themselves with it. Goes into a data summary. This is back in, I think, July. This one is an example from, so yeah, there were 211 eBird checklists in 7 days, with black-bellied green being the most common species. And on my naturalist, 41 observers. And again, interestingly, most common species was Canadian bunchberry. So, and the other part of this is we've built this same sort of example for Cottonwoods and Waters, and we do want to hopefully implement that at some point too. And this managers think the display here like this. Right now, we're going to be working with Saguaro National Park to also build and help them build one for their park as well, which is exciting. The little photo gallery, which is fun to look through, and potentially your photos are hosted here.
Is the Saguaro connection, is that Scott Swan? Is
Don
that
Swan.
Don Swan?
Yeah.
Don Swan, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, great. He has a connection for here.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think his brother similar.
Mhm.
Species Explorer is a fun, again, map that you can click on any species. So I chose Eastern Hemlock, and you can see there was one observation of Eastern Hemlock during this time span. And then some examples of some citizen science projects. There's what I want to do more of is sort of get more examples that kind of rotate in randomly. Right now, we just sort of have a fixed few. But yeah, I think that sort of getting more examples and implementing those here so that they that there's just more places for visitors to sort of connect with actual projects that are using citizen science. And yeah, so just a quick review, the project was those sort of three different products that I just talked about, the Science from the People manuscript, the manager's report, and this welcome center display. By working with citizen scientists in this capacity, we can really, I think, help keep monitoring costs low and at least augment current monitoring in a way that's hopefully productive and meaningful. We can also engage the community in meaningful science and monitoring and hopefully detect species at a scale that's not maybe possible otherwise. But of course, this does require some active communication. If we can successfully communicate the importance of volunteers' time and effort, and create like this positive feedback loop, I think that we can really help inspire people to make a difference in the place that they love, like Acadia National Park and the Cottonwoods and Waters. And hopefully that would lead to them being more engaged to work on more projects. And the other part about this is that since I've built all these products in R and in this fashion, it makes it really easy to adapt and to transfer this to other geographic units or make changes. And that's what I think is another strong piece of it. And since we were building that from the beginning, it makes it just really easy to transfer. And that was one of the main goals. So that's why, you know, we've been talking to Saguaro National Park, and that's why we made like a whole example with the Cottonwoods and Waters doing this exact same thing for that park. So yeah, I think that it's just highly transferable. It's really easy to add new data visualizations. So getting feedback and implementing things that are more useful for specific cases is really useful, really easy and really important to do. And it's easy to do new styling following the same sort of template that I've laid out. And yeah, big thanks to everybody here and everybody online and in person for attending today. And especially thanks to the National Park Foundation for their support. Yeah.
So time for questions.
Where did your display come from?
I built it.
You built it? Is that in conversations with the other part, is that, I mean, that, so you will just build?
So since it's not in, since it's sort of like the Scudic Institute area, right, we don't have to go through as many of the hoops as like National Park Service does for the accessibility and all those sort of things for their displays. And so with Saguaro, they're going to have to work within NPS to get their sort of display, but my like software end of it can be implemented in it.
So you're mirroring your carpentry with your software? It's like
I try to do that as much as possible.
Is there a reason why there's not one at the park, like, just because of like the hoops that you have to jump
I
through?
think it's in Rockefeller Hall, which is.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
okay.
part-
It's managed by. Scudic
Right.
Institute. The inside, yeah.
Yeah.
Has there been talk about having one like at a
At our
visitor
visitors,
center?
at the Hills Cove
Yeah.
Visitor Center or the Nature Center in Sordoma, I don't know, I think that would, I don't think that there's been any
Hasn't been
conversations
much.
about that, and I think that'll be just a capacity issue to
Mhm.
see if there's interest, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great conversation to have and something that we definitely be interested in. We do also want to do this with the Cottonwoods and Waters, and their visitor center too, so.
Adam, I mentioned this to Adam at there was an intertribal workshop, so Adam Kozlowski, who's the data analysis for, anyhow, for. And he said he was interested in potentially doing something like this for the other NATM parks. But yeah, but so we can try to set up, I don't know if Adam's online, my guess is not, but we can try to set up a meeting.
Yeah, actually,
I mean, do you think this would be of interest to other parks?
Yeah, I think Parks would be into it, but like Marsh Billings is really active and iNaturalist, so I could see them.
Maybe Boston Harbor Islands.
Yeah, Boston Harbor is really active, just to like show the engagement of citizen science. Yeah, I could see it. It's the 508 compliance thing that kills everything. That I don't know. Yeah, like you got away with it, you know, if you need to have a way to get away with it or deal with it, and It's a big hurdle.
Is it because it can't link to eBird and My Naturalist?
No, it's because like you have to have alt text and you have to be
Right.
able to like use a keyboard to get through everything and
Yeah,
is your website able to do that?
I'd say 95% well.
That's great.
I tried to
Yeah.
build it in, yeah. I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time doing that.
Cool, and it's just like getting the okay from the Park Service side of things to like embed that in a website, if that's what you're trying to do. It's gonna be really challenging. I don't know if you need authority to operate, do it like it.
You do.
Yeah, which has been our giant barrier for
Mhm.
everything, so.
Yeah.
So once I get through Scudic, everything works. So, one of the reasons why it's great to have Scudic is it's perfect. But it's
but I
better.
mean, but our stuff should be accessible, right?
Yeah.
So we have to find a way to make it work, yeah.
But it being accessible and it getting through the Park Service
Yes.
bureaucracy are
Right.
sometimes different.
Yeah, accessible and then authority to operate and the IT security thing,
Yeah.
and that is like an even bigger, like, 6-figure investment, but.
National Park Foundation may be willing to help fund some of that too,
Yeah.
if you go back to them.
But you should definitely build everything to be accessible from the beginning, so that
Yeah.
it's better to run up into
Absolutely.
IT problems than. it not being.
So,
Great.
Are there checks to, um, are there checks for any false IDs within a naturalist and eBirds, or is it kind of just trusting the competency of the user?
yeah, so right now for the manager's report, it's not actually using any checks. Because we wanted to get as many potential observations in as soon as possible. Because I think that's where it starts to, is the issue is that it's hard to figure out, it's not so much if it's backlogged, because I remember now, I did include a way to, as long as it's submitted in or observed during that time, it shows up, so it could be from a few weeks ago, when somebody finally submitted it. So that's being included, but what's not being included is if I had it at research grade and then only, right, for example. So it sort of has at least INAB checks and balances. If you included just those, you will miss species later on that then get upgraded to research grade status, because that doesn't get like timestamped as easily to access anyway.
Can you go through, like, how does a iNaturalist observation make it from observation to research grade?
Yeah, so you go out, you take your smartphone, you take a photo of something and you submit it, say it's a white-tailed deer. You can enter it as, I saw a white-tailed deer, right, and you sign that, tax that to it, pass on to it. At least, once it's there, it's sort of sitting with like a needs ID category. And you need, at least one more person to agree with your observation, if you assigned it an observation. So you'd have to have somebody to agree with it, and then once they do, it can be elevated to this sort of research grade status. So, I think that there's limitations to that, and sometimes things can slip through, especially in more tricky identification scenarios. But the point, I think, with what we have with the manager's report, where it really matters is if we consider it to be something, then, Jesse or Vic can look at it and confirm that it really is that or not. And that's, I think that I've communicated that, or at least I've tried, so.
How do you treat, so a lot of things get it submitted and they don't know what it is,
Mhm.
and then somebody comes on and IDs it. And then in those cases, you need two people to ID it to get research grade.
Exactly.
Does your feed kind of grab those as they get identified? Even if it's like weeks after?
I don't think it does,
Okay.
that's the limitation, yeah.
Okay,
And
so it
maybe
has
that's
to be
what-
positively ID'd, like by the person,
Well, right now,
or at least within the first week.
I actually changed it so that way it's all observations too.
Okay.
So even if someone decided that they're gonna call it something terribly wrong, it's
Right.
still gonna show up right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that way we don't miss those sort of scenarios, yeah.
But a lot of times people would like ID something that's like grasshopper,
Right.
and they don't ID it to like what species of grasshopper,
Yeah,
or,
Yeah.
or, yeah. So, cause you can ID things to just like family or It's okay.
Yeah, do apps that use iNaturalist, like Seek, do those get added to the database as well? Oh, cool.
Because I believe Seek is, all their data is automatically added to the financial database.
Oh, okay.
Is
It's
that
not
not?
automatically, you have to link your account, so
Oh,
if
okay.
you're using Seek and you have an iNaturalist account. And you use Seek to ID something, you can say, yes, add to
Gotcha.
iNaturalist, so the user has to do. Just like Merlin and eBird, so if you ID a bird with Merlin, it'll say, submit an eBird. It'll give you the option to submit via eBird,
Gotcha.
otherwise it doesn't go to you.
But it seems like
May I
this
put in a
is,
question from the peanut gallery?
go for it.
Okay, hi, this is Molly Ross from Friends of Katahdin Woods and Waters, and I love this presentation. And hello, friends. With whom are you working right now at Katahdin Woods and Waters? Are you working with the park? Or are you working with the Friends group? I'm not on the staff, so I might be removed from whatever you're doing, but I'm glad you're doing it.
Hi Molly, thanks for coming, and great question. We originally were working with Isabel, but upon her change, we've kind of lost ties for that project. So that's something that we definitely want to reconnect with, and try to keep moving forward, so. Yeah, I don't know if you can help facilitate that, but we should definitely get in touch.
Yeah, well, as Abe and Nick and others know, I'm passionate about building up this part of Katahdin Woods and Waters, and I love working with Acadia and the contrast between the amazing records of Acadia and what people can do to help with the new unit and learning about the other end of the Penobscot River is real exciting. If it just, I'm putting in my mind, I'll share with you, whatever way's easier. So Isabel was a force of nature herself, and it was great she got things established, but friends can be supportive of this kind of thing. And so, and I'm always looking for ways for Scudic's involvement. So thank you so much. And you've got a friend at Katahdin Woods and Waters for support.
Thank you, yeah, I'll reach out to you, okay?
Any other questions?
I maybe have one, so like, I'm not minimizing the value of this at all, right? Like, the importance of cataloging species, engaging citizen science, and the things you can do with it. But the stats background in me is just screaming bias, like on every slide, like bias, bias. Like, how are people in this world talking about the bias it's introduced with? One is like, the more people you have sampling, the more species you're gonna find. That's just a given fact that has nothing to do with the ecosystem. If you have people that are just sampling along the corridors that are accessible, you have bias in that data set. And like, and then things are called research grade and it's like, but bias. So, yeah, anyway, like, how is this talked about? And yeah, sorry, kind of.
I mean, it's totally right, I mean, there is tons of bias in it, and I think that you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think in the way that we're using it, just to detect species and then have managers who know the species confirm them before any sort of action is taken, I think that sort of eliminates any concern of that,
Yes.
so.
But
Yeah.
what can managers use this for?
I think it's just
What's an
a,
example of how a manager's gonna use this?
well, like,
Sitting here as a manager, how many herring dog observations do I need to know about?
right,
Well,
well, you
so
don't.
one thing that I would like to see in the weekly report from my, like, I'm not a manager, but as a communications person, like, I'm curious, how many people are submitting each week? Right, to understand the activity of citizen science in the park, and where are people, who's out there, submitting things, and where are they? So managers of people, that might be something that's of interest, to just get a sense for where are people doing this observing in the park. But for species, all of that.
Yeah, no, that's good, we should, I mean, this is what we want, right? We want sort of communication and discussion around these, so we can add in new parts that are going to be most useful. That's why there's sort of like the adaptability sort of at the forefront. And to answer your question, I think it is an early detection thing. That's the most useful piece out of like the manager's report, those first sort of products is the, you know, if we can detect, emerald ash borer earlier than say our monitoring plots could, just by someone who was taking a hike and saying, oh, hey, I think that's emerald ash borer, and they take a photo of it, then Jesse can, know about it sooner. And maybe he would already know about it through iNaturalist if he was searching for those observations, but most likely you don't go on iNaturalist and type in emerald ash borer once a week. So I think that that's where it kind of is pushing the importance is, just getting that information out there, sooner.
Are people being primed to go look for invasive species in
That's-
advance?
Great question. That's our next, I think, step. And Jesse is kind of working on like hemlock woolly adelgid stuff and how do we do these. And I think that developing more stratified protocols, or at least active protocols, is gonna be like the next big step to help make these even better.
Data science stuff you worked out, super cool. I know what you had to do. Good job, yeah.
It's all, I did CSS for all of the styling too, so I just
Nice.
try to like completely overruled any of the like, what's the?
Like the default markdown
Mhm.
formatting,
Yeah.
nice, like the bootstrap that they, yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what it is, like that one, like the manager report's just, yeah, the markdown that I just completely overruled all styling for and made it in HTML written out basically without code and then styled with CSS, and then the same sort of thing for the display, except that the display is, why am I blanking on this? What's the web hosting, through R? Shiny, an R Shiny. It's an R Shiny, but I, again, just wrote it all out with HTML instead of using any of the formats. So,
I said legit skills, just so you guys
That's,
know.
and that's why we're so excited to
Yeah.
have Kyle work with us at Scudic Institute.
Yeah, so you do have to be really careful about your questions, and sometimes, we're not doing it for, Kyle's not doing it for this report, but you can train specific people that just submit their data that are following particular protocols and then grab just the data of people you knew were doing one particular thing. And people are looking at like how you can, like in some kind of, anyhow, how you can combine this with like old museum specimens, like herbarium specimens or animal specimens, but there are questions, like it's interesting, the bias is different, right? So people take pictures with their iPhones a little bit differently than people collected plant specimens in the past, but they all have their biases. But nowadays, these are the, like, far and away the biggest source of data that are going into global biodiversity databases, like GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, like I think like maybe 70% of new observations now are citizen science through eBird and iNaturalist and similar programs in other countries. Although eBird and iNaturalist are global, which does lead to questions.
This, like when the top plant recorded in Acadia is 3,2 cinquefoil that only occurs in really specific habitats and that are like 1% or less of the actual park. And that's feeding in the GBIF, which so many people are using and not thinking about the bias that's in that center. So
People, I mean, the museum specimens that were the original source of data for GBIF data, also had their biases, right? People liked showy things, liked rare things, so they were way overrepresented but so biases, you always kind of have to, but have to be aware of it, but you're right, that a lot of people are kind of in an era where people are grabbing data and doing things with it and saying, and making inferences that aren't responsible. But I think this is the kind of start of figuring out like what can we do, and right, and if we get trained people that go out and be looking for pests or other things, we can say figure out what we can say. Cause there's a lot that we can't, but there's some that we can, and there's also figuring out what people like to take pictures of, which actually all by itself is kind of some information for.
Well, there's
marketers or communicators.
I mean, the stories, the iNaturalist stories that I like are the ones where, like, you don't know what your observation could be useful, right? So you have no idea what it could be helping or informing, and you might have caught the corner of some plant or, you know, the angle of the wing on a bumblebee that somebody somewhere is studying, you know, there was an example of the sort of dragonfly colors, and somebody realized that there was a climate influence on the shift in dragonfly pigment over time, right? And only from iNaturalist, so, you know, I think knowing you can't do abundant, right, like you can't do abundance, I mean, landscape change is a good example where we could only use like presence, absence, but we could, for the birds, we could use common and some grade of understanding is there a shift in abundance over time, we were able to do that, so.
It is amazing that there's still a lot, even though these kinds of programs, like eBird's been around for what, 20 years now?
2002,
Yeah, so, you know, and people are still kind of figuring out like what it can be used for and what it can't and how to use it effectively and. But I mean, what's really clear is that there's a lot of interest in contributing and there are scientists who do wanna ask data, and so this will be an ongoing. Ongoing opportunity, because there are just a lot of people interested in contributing, and the more we can kind of put it into productive. Pathways, the better, for the science, but. Yeah, but it's not as easy as just getting people to contribute and then therefore we understand nature.
Right. Yeah, so two things. One, for awesome content on how to use eBird and iNaturalist in more rigorous scientific ways. Allie Johnston, a really great author. Don't know anything else about her other than I just read papers that they wrote. So really awesome stuff, it seems like, and pretty cool to see. Like if you subscribe to like iNaturalist or eBird, Google Scholar alerts, you get those pretty often, and it's pretty cool to see the content that comes through. So there's definitely ways that people are working with this. eBird is a little bit easier, I think, for like occupancy. Like there's more structured ways with eBird checklists, right? Like that exists more so in the innateness or whatever, how the project was built. And then I was gonna say something else.
Yeah.
Is anybody doing the social science after, I mean, what you said, we hope this changes people's behavior. I mean, who are those people and then is it really affecting how people interact with conserved areas? That would be a really cool thing. And the other thing that concerns me is, you know, starting to see lots and lots of fungi show up on lists. I'd love to know, are we seeing impacts from people, you know, looking on a list and saying, oh geez, you've got all these beautiful, you know, tree ears and we're gonna go find them and then we're gonna, you know, so some of the more concerning ways that more information gets out. And also the fact that this isn't, I wish our educators and interpreters were in the room and involved with this, because the messaging around this needs to come through, you know, those platforms and that as well. So we need to figure out how those folks get engaged around this as well.
Mhm.
We could talk about it at our communication meeting tomorrow. I think there's capacity, just issues.
Well, there is capacity, I mean, but the argument, one of the whole points of this is that we don't have any capacity, we're trying to leverage an external capacity,
Yeah.
but we really should know that it's going on and be able to at least be aware of it. In a way that's potentially useful, so.
And as contributors, I mean, I see a lot of park staff.
Yeah,
interpreters
exactly.
Who are contributing observations
Exactly.
because they see a moth on the entrance station, you know, at night or something.
Right, and that may be a way where it gets,
Yeah.
you know, capacitized
Yeah.
a little more, but I think that the storytelling and the information around it really is critical as much as, you know, running around, you know, doing it.
We should see if we could do the spiel during training, for instance,
Yeah.
in the spring. Yeah, there is social science being done on this too. For the most part, the impact is very low, depending upon, like, just contributing to iNaturalist doesn't actually teach you anything or very much. So it's in the structure of the program that you're participating in. And by and large, the biggest participants already know a lot and already are excited about improving the environment. And so where you see the impacts, I think, are in students, and in programs that are specifically designed to not just be preaching to the choir, to be specifically designed to be grabbing new audiences, whether they're kind of underserved audiences that
Right, I
don't
was
have
gonna say,
access to natural areas typically,
Right.
or whether they're like corporate programs, or other programs, but that's where you typically see the biggest impact. But by and large, these programs are preaching to the choir, and so you're not seeing big measurable impacts from the social science, but there are a lot of people measuring it. Arguably, my guess is with citizen science, there's a huge number of people looking at the impact on participants relative to the people looking at the hard science coming from the nature observations, which is a problem. The field has kind of shifted to more of not a problem that we shouldn't be doing the social science and the environmental justice and other things, but there aren't enough people, I think, doing the hard science bit responsibly and kind of really kind of scaling that up. But yeah. Anyhow. Yeah, but we're at the top of the hour, so thank you very much, really appreciate it, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks, Emma, for keeping track of things online.
I love that.
Did you have any meeting?
No.
Are we meeting, do you know, are we meeting here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a good room?
Yeah, I didn't.
No, I think I'm gonna be.